Hey heroes, welcome to another avenging episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, you can sign up for $1 per month over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelite. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. For years, Patricia, Patsy Walker, was celebrated as the ideal model of a typical teenage girl. Many of her romantic exploits and miscellaneous misadventures growing up in small-town America were recounted to the public as largely fictionalized stories in comic magazines. However, fans of Patsy Walker's media persona could never have guessed the extraordinary life this seemingly ordinary girl would eventually lead. But before we get to that, let's begin at the beginning, in Centerville, California, where Patsy Walker was born and raised. She was the daughter of a man named Joshua Stanley Walker and his wife Dorothy. Dorothy Walker, however, was an overbearing and controlling mother. She micromanaged Patsy's life, trying to mold her into what she considered the perfect daughter. Growing increasingly miserable in his marriage, Joshua left Dorothy and sought custody over their daughter. But since Dorothy brought in the majority of their income, the courts sided with her. She even went so far as to conceal her divorce from the public eye, concocting a story that Joshua had died. By age 7, Patsy began to resent her mother as a rift grew between them. Fortunately, she found a surrogate parental figure in the family housekeeper, Dolly Donahue. As a young girl, Patsy was naturally athletic and somewhat tomboyish, but at times clumsy and awkward. Dorothy attempted to teach her poise and grace, pushing her into a career as a child fashion model. This was done with the help of Millie Collins, a friend of Dorothy who was herself a highly successful model. Although Patsy was reluctant, it seems that she did form a friendship with the older Millie. In any event, her modeling career petered out in her teenage years as Patsy preferred to focus on her schooling and her social life. She notably had an ongoing rivalry with her wealthy friend and classmate Hedy Wolf. Other residents of Centerville included Patsy's close friend Nancy Brown, as well as Nan's boyfriend Tom Hale, better known by his nickname Tubbs. As a side note, Tom and Nancy did later get married and had 2 kids of their own. However, Tom has since come out as gay, and so the two are now separated. Patsy also had a younger brother named Mickey who was amused by her misadventures, and an on-again off-again boyfriend, Buzz Baxter, real name Robert. Feeling overshadowed, Hedy Wolf often engaged in schemes to separate Patsy and Buzz. She was sometimes aided by her own occasional boyfriend, Ronnie Robbins. But despite the rivalries and hijinks, the teens of Centerville were ultimately still friends. And it was these relationships that would serve as inspiration for Dorothy Walker's next scheme to capitalize on her daughter. But by this point, superheroes had begun emerging with increasing regularity in New York City, and Patsy idolized them. She even had an innocent crush on Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic. When Richards married Susan Storm, Patsy Walker and Hedy Wolf visited New York to see the ceremony in person. Meanwhile, Dorothy began producing a line of teen romance comic books starring her daughter. These books featured comedically fictionalized versions of Patsy and her childhood friends in Centerville. Starting her own company, Patsy Walker Enterprises, Dorothy coerced Centerville's residents into signing licensing agreements. This secured the multimedia rights to their names and likenesses, allowing her to use them in Patsy Walker products in perpetuity. And products there were, with the success of the comics leading to dolls, games, movies, and even a short-lived television series. Not everyone was satisfied with their unflattering depictions, with Hedy in particular resenting the petty, conniving caricature of herself. Ironically, Dorothy didn't include herself in the books, and the fictional Patsy's mother was instead called Mary Walker. Similarly, Patsy's father Joshua was referred to by his middle name, Stanley, in Dorothy's comic. Dorothy's sister, Sophia McConnell, acted as Patsy's manager, commanding both fear and respect from her niece. As time went on, Dorothy began finding it difficult to separate the real Patsy Walker from the idealized version she had created. In fact, the sheer volume of stories produced by Patsy Walker Enterprises makes it nearly impossible to say with any certainty which, if any, are based on actual events, and which were invented by Dorothy out of whole cloth. For example, one tale features Patsy releasing a literal genie from a magic lamp. While that might seem like an obvious fiction, her life would eventually get even stranger than that. One thing that did happen in both the real world and the fictional comic was Buzz Baxter, being slightly older than Patsy, graduating first and joining the military. He saw combat in Southeast Asia, where he received injuries that left him hospitalized for a time. In the pages of the comic, Patsy dreamed of attending college after high school, but her parents could not afford it, and so she started working for the Centerville Globe newspaper, initially as a secretary but later becoming a reporter alongside Hedy Wolf. Editor Ted Trent and reporter Mike Harold were both potential love interests for the fictional Patsy, but it's unconfirmed whether either of these men actually existed. In reality, Patsy resented how badly she'd been exploited and rebelled against her mother and aunt. Shortly after graduating high school, she married Buzz Baxter against their wishes. Fully estranged from her daughter, Dorothy moved to New Jersey, immersing herself in her work and her memories. Meanwhile, Buzz's experiences overseas had deeply affected him, leaving him ill-tempered and cynical. While Patsy wanted to get a job of her own to help contribute and be more independent, Buzz grew more abusive towards her. Then one day, Buzz was assigned by the Pentagon to a security position at the Brand Corporation. During this time, his task was to capture the furry mutant known as the Beast, who was allegedly sabotaging Brand operations. Of course, a person of interest in this investigation was Brand scientist Hank McCoy. While Buzz failed to find the Beast, his marriage continued to suffer as he ignored his wife for his mission. But then one morning, his quarry literally appeared on the Baxters' home doorstep. Finding the mutant wounded, Patsy brought him inside to tend to his injuries while Buzz was at the office. As it turns out, the Beast was delirious after barely surviving a battle against the android Quasimodo. And from his unconscious rambling, Patsy learned what the X-Men fans out there already know, that the Beast was Hank McCoy. In truth, he had been using his dual identity in an attempt to battle corruption in the corporation. When the Beast awakened, Patsy agreed to keep his secret as long as he promised to help her achieve her old dream of becoming a superhero. Hank reluctantly agreed, and Patsy even provided him an alibi to keep her husband off his trail. And it was shortly after this that Patsy had had enough of Buzz Baxter's abuses and neglect and left him. Her wholesome public image tarnished by a messy divorce, Patsy Walker Enterprises started to decline, and Patsy herself was estranged from her Aunt Sophia. She spent months hoping to see the Beast again until finally learning that he'd joined the Avengers. Heading to Avengers Mansion, she was determined to make him keep his promise. And Beast was able to convince Captain America and the others to let Patsy join them in their investigation of Brand. This put Patsy and the Avengers into conflict with a thoroughly corrupt Buzz Baxter and his own superhuman lackeys, a version of the Squadron Supreme. Ultimately, they came upon a warehouse containing technology and equipment acquired by the Brand Corporation. That's where Patsy Walker found something that would change her destiny forever. A clawed costume identical to the one previously worn by a vigilante known as the Cat. The suit itself can trace its origins back to a corrupt financier named Mal Donalbain, who wanted to create an army of enslaved women. However, his plans were uncovered by his lead scientist, Dr. Joanne Tumolo, who took one of the suits. It was that suit that was worn by Tumolo's genetically enhanced assistant, Greer Grant Nelson. Nelson attacked Donalbain as the Cat, but he ultimately took his own life rather than face the consequences of his actions. The Cat went on to have a short-lived vigilante career, but soon disappeared from the public eye. What neither the Avengers nor the general public knew at the time was that she had actually taken a new identity after being transformed into the superhuman cat person Tigra. In any event, it seems that following Donalbain's death, at least one of the cat costumes had been obtained by the Brand Corporation. While the cat's abilities were primarily the result of Tumolo's augmentation, the Avengers suspected that the costume itself would enhance its wearer. And so both Captain America and Iron Man agreed to give the suit to Patsy. Donning the costume, Patsy Walker finally became a costumed hero and dubbed herself Hellcat. Despite her lack of experience in superheroics, Patsy's natural athleticism allowed her to immediately jump into action alongside the Avengers. But during their battles against Brand, the team was defeated by a supervillain called the Orca. The 6 heroes were held captive by Buzz Baxter, and it was Hellcat who awakened first. She soon proved her resourcefulness by breaking free and defeating her ex-husband single-handedly. After the fall of the Brand Corporation, the Avengers offered Hellcat a spot on their newest roster. However, the telepathic martial artist Moondragon insisted that Patsy wasn't ready yet. For those unaware, Moondragon is the daughter of Drax the Destroyer, who was raised by monks in an eternal colony on Saturn's moon Titan. Patsy also briefly operated as a vigilante in Chicago where the previous cat prowled, during which time she had an encounter with another feline-themed adventurer, the Black Cat. The fledgling hero then accompanied Moondragon back to Titan, where she engaged in extensive training, honing her mind and body to peak human capacity. However, Hellcat's training was cut short just as she began to unlock the same superhuman powers as her mentor. Sensing a dangerous artifact called the Star of Capistan, Moondragon sent Hellcat back to Earth to warn the other heroes. After putting the Avengers on standby alert, Patsy went to warn Dr. Strange at his Sanctum Sanctorum. However, Strange had already been possessed by the star and transformed into its avatar, the Red Raja. And so instead, Hellcat joined forces with 2 of his allies, Valkyrie and the Red Guardian, both of which were members of an informal superhero group started by Strange, the Defenders. Hellcat soon became a member of this group as well when she helped the women confront the Raja and their mind-controlled teammates. During this incident, Patsy demonstrated her increased agility by surviving a direct encounter with the Incredible Hulk. Ultimately, this conflict ended when the sorceress defender Clea freed Strange from the star's control. Over the following months, Hellcat became a core member of the group and aided the Defenders against a variety of villains. She forged lasting friendships with several of her teammates, notably Nighthawk and Valkyrie. Despite her incomplete training, Patsy displayed some limited telekinetic abilities during this time due to Moondragon endowing her with a portion of her mental powers. She also sometimes wore a dimension-warping cape called a Shadow Cloak after stealing one from the evil cult of the Harvester of Eyes. However, she ultimately decided that the cloak was too dangerous for regular use. Sometime after that, Moondragon also reclaimed the mental energy she'd passed on to Patsy, mostly removing her telekinetic abilities. And so Hellcat most often relied on her agility and athleticism in combat. For a time, it was assumed that her costume was augmenting her abilities, but this was eventually disproven. While Patsy operated as Hellcat, her mother Dorothy was stricken with cancer and slowly dying. Patsy put off seeing her in the hospital, but then one day it was simply too late. Following Dorothy's death, Patsy moved into her New Jersey home and reunited with her surrogate mother, Dolly Donahue. And after that, Patsy's superhero moniker would turn out to be well chosen, as the forces of hell would be increasingly involved in her life. First and foremost, one of her fellow defenders was Daimon Hellstrom, the literal son of Satan. Well, technically Daimon's father is a demon named Marduk Kurios, one of several Hell Lords to vie for the title of Satan, and is often referred to as such. This Satan was also one of the guiding forces behind the Six-Fingered Hand, a group of demons who would soon clash with the Defenders. As it turns out, before she died, Dorothy made a deal with one of the demons, Avarish, offering her daughter in exchange for resurrection. As a result of that deal, Patsy was later abducted by the Six-Fingered Hand and possessed by Avarish. Furthermore, the house was destroyed and Dolly was wounded while Patsy was being taken. But with some help from her fellow defenders, Hellcat was ultimately able to cast the demon out. While Avarish's defeat prevented Dorothy's resurrection, Patsy was deeply affected by her mother's betrayal, Dolly's injuries, and the whole experience in general. Meanwhile, Isaac Christians, the gargoyle who captured her for the demons, repented and became a defender himself. Soon after that, Satan and the other Hell Lords engaged in a plot to create a literal hell on Earth. Not only that, but the devil fooled Patsy into thinking that she was actually his daughter. The Hell Lords were opposed by the Defenders, but Satan ultimately refused to kill his own son and called off the demonic invasion. While Patsy did her best to maintain a happy-go-lucky attitude in front of others, Dolly could tell that deep down she was growing more depressed. At her suggestion, Patsy tracked down and reunited with her real father, putting to rest the idea that the devil had spawned her. After that, Patsy Walker and Daimon Hellstrom grew closer, but she was initially unsure of her feelings. Their relationship, however, was made possible after Daimon was rid of his demonic side, referred to as his dark soul. They confessed their love to one another and announced their intentions to leave the Defenders and get married. Their eventual ceremony was interrupted by a man calling himself Mad Dog and other agents of the subversive organization known as the Secret Empire. This Mad Dog turned out to be Patsy's ex-husband, Buzz Baxter, who had gone completely off the deep end. Ultimately, though, the villains were repelled and Patsy Walker was married to the son of Satan. Moving to San Francisco, they worked together out of costume as supernatural investigators. They also engaged in occasional superheroics, with Daimon devising the masked identity of Hellstorm. The couple aided the West Coast Avengers on several occasions, which initially led to some tension between Patsy and Tigra. Later, Patsy Walker publicly revealed her secret identity and told her life story in her autobiography, The Hellcat Chronicles. While promoting her book, she was attacked again by Buzz Baxter as Mad Dog. Buzz claimed that Patsy's book was filled with lies about him, while Patsy insisted that she never really loved him. In the end, Hellcat defeated Mad Dog, and Patsy admitted to herself that she did love him once, but those days were long gone. She later returned to Centerville for the first time in years to reconnect with her old friends and reconcile with her aunt. However, tragedy struck once again when she learned that her husband was slowly dying without his dark soul. In an attempt to save his life, Patsy used dark magic to confer with the devil and restore Daimon's satanic side. However, the experience of witnessing the dark soul fully manifest overwhelmed Patsy's mind and drove her mad. She spent the following weeks bedridden, locked in Daimon's estate and tended to by the gargoyle. She fell into a depression so great that she drew the attention of a being called the Death Urge, the physical embodiment of self-destruction. The Death Urge offered to do for Patsy what it often did for others and help her die. While one could consider Patsy a victim in this scenario, killed by an overzealous euthanizer, she herself would refer to what happened as a suicide. On that note, let me just say that if you or a loved one are struggling with depression or contemplating self-harm, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional for help. Due to the mystical forces involved in her death, Patsy's soul was claimed by the Hell Lord Mephisto and dragged into his domain. However, she wouldn't stay there, as Daimon had inherited his father's own separate hell dimension. While he wasn't able to retrieve her himself, as doing so would start a war between the Nether Realms, he was able to manipulate Hawkeye and the Thunderbolts into invading Mephisto's hell and rescuing Patsy. With her mind, body, and soul restored, Patsy Walker divorced Diamond Hellstrom to give herself a fresh start. She released a second book detailing her further experiences and moved back to Centerville for a time. While the emotional scars of what happened remained, Hedy Wolf put their rivalry aside to be there for her. Hedy had also become the new head of Patsy Walker Properties after Sophia retired, renaming the company Patsy Hedy Entertainment. Meanwhile, Patsy again adopted the identity of Hellcat and discovered that as a side effect of her resurrection, she had a heightened awareness of and resistance to mystical energies. She could also summon her costume on demand, even altering its appearance, and her strength had increased to superhuman levels. Her fighting spirit soon returned in full force when she intervened in a conspiracy involving Centerville's mayor, Nicholas Scratch. The sorceress son of the witch Agatha Harkness, Scratch served the dread Dormammu, ruler of the Dark Dimension. Dormammu plotted to conquer several hell dimensions, including Mephisto's and Diamond's, but was ultimately thwarted by Hellcat. This gave her the rare honor of earning Mephisto's gratitude, freeing her from retaliation for escaping his realm. After that, Patsy returned to her classic look and has continued to operate as Hellcat. While her struggles with abuse, depression, and suicide will always be a part of her past, she refuses to let them be the only things that define her future. She's been an Avenger and a Defender, a superstar and a superhero, from small-town America to the Big Apple, from the Moon Titan to Hell and back. Once she was celebrated as the quintessential ordinary teenage girl. Now, Patsy Walker is recognized as one of the most extraordinary women in the Marvel Universe. And if you want to read more of her adventures, there are several Hellcat comics after the ones we've talked about today. There's the book Patsy Walker Hellcat by Catherine Immonen and David LaFuente, which ran for 5 issues starting in 2008. Then there's the 2016 and 2017 series Patsy Walker aka Hellcat by Kate Leth and Brittany L. Williams. Finally, Patsy appears in the first 20 issues of the Iron Man series starting in 2020, which then leads into the Iron Man Hellcat Annual, and finally the 5-issue Hellcat series from 2023, all of which were written by Christopher Cantwell. But that's all I've got for you this week. If you liked this video, you can show your support and really help me out by leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, or sharing it on your favorite social media. As always, all of the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me, including my Patreon page where for only $1 a month you can get your name in these special thanks here. So until next time, true believers, Excelsior!